All right, guys, we're going to talk about Germany now and how Germany becomes its modern day self because Germany hasn't always been Germany like you imagine it. Okay, let me show you a map real fast to start out with. All right, all these colored areas right here now combined make up what we think of as Germany. Okay, and the first thing that we want to know about Germany as a country leading up to World War I is that it wasn't always this way. All right. Uh, we always think in terms of American history, so let me give you an example. During the 1860s, what big event was happening in the United States? The Civil War. Okay. Now, while we're in the midst of Civil War, Germany, like we're fracturing apart. Germany is working on getting together because Germany didn't exist at the time. All right. For instance, right here, you can see that Germany was a bunch of fragmented little kingdoms. Okay. And that's the first thing that we want to know, we want to write down here is that Germany didn't exist. It was a bunch of fragmented little kingdoms. Okay. And there's some names that you might know that might be familiar to you. Like, for example, have you ever heard of somebody who wants to live in a bohemian fashion? Well, that's because Bohemia is a region in Germany. Bavaria, okay? You ever heard of Bavarian cream pies, right? Or Bavarian chocolate? They're known for that in the region of Bavaria. How about that? Okay? Hanover. You might have heard of Hanover. You're like, oh, the pretzels, right? Hanover is a region in that particular area. Okay? Have you ever heard of Holstein cows? Holstein. All right. Now, you see that Germany is a bunch of fragmented little states. Okay. The most dominant country in this little region here is an area that we know of is called Prussia with a P. All right. It is distinct from Russia. All right. They're not the same, even though they might sound the same. Okay. So they're a bunch of fragmented little kingdoms, and Prussia is easily the strongest of all these little kingdoms. Okay. So let's talk about Prussia for a second because they're an interesting little country. Right? By themselves, Prussia's fairly strong. All right. And the king of Prussia is this stuffy looking fellow right here, Wilhelm the First. Ooh. Check out Wilhelm. Look at those chops on the side of his face and that mustache. That guy is all 19th century man right there. And Wilhelm the First of Prussia, he's the king, and he has a dream. All right? Not like Martin Luther King, Jaden. Okay, not like that. All right? Wilhelm the First says, look, all these little fragmented kingdoms here, and we're going to go back to the map for a second. He says, look, all these fragmented little kingdoms, we have common culture, we have common language, common ancestry. We're part of the Germanic people. All right? We all have these things in common. He wants to unify these groups together in one big country. Okay? He wants to unify them together in one big country. That's his goal. Okay? He wants to consolidate them, to bring them all together. That's his big goal, his big dream. He says, look, we got common culture, we got common language, common religious beliefs, common ways of living. I want to unify everybody together. Okay? It also helps, too, that it would make him a legendary figure. He's worried about his own place in history. And on top of that, it's going to make Prussia a stronger nation because who do you think, once he unifies these German states all together, who do you think he wants to be in charge of it all? Himself, okay? It's ambitious, but it's also a little on the selfish side. All right, so Wilhelm the First wants to do that. But here's the thing in Prussia, the king is royalty and he's in charge of a lot. But they also have a government where they have other government officials who have authority. And Wilhelm the First, his right hand man, who's going to help him achieve his dream, is this fellow right here. His name, Otto von Bismarck. Ooh, don't laugh at him, Jaden. That guy right there is as BA gets. Okay? Wow. And BA stands for bad attitude. Okay? Bismarck. This is what I want to look like when I get old. Bismarck. Look at those big old bushy eyebrows and that mustache. This guy is a serious man. Okay? Otto von Bismarck is the prime minister of Prussia. All right? It's a regular government position. He's not royalty. All right? So you got Wilhelm I, who's the king. He's the royalty. He's in charge of a lot of government things. but they leave the rest to a prime minister, right? You know how we have a president of the United States? Well, like they're like, hey, we don't want one guy having that much authority, so there's a king and a prime minister, okay? Each of them have separate powers and authorities, all right? Now, Bismarck and Wilhelm both have the same idea here. They want to unify all those German states together. Now, here's a question for you. And once again, I got to go back to the map. All right? Going back to the map here, okay? All these little states are fragmented, and Wilhelm I and Otto von Bismarck want to unify them together, okay? Do you think the countries around them, like France, Italy, Russia, do you think they want these states to unify together? No. Hey, Jordan, tell me why not? Why would they not want these states to unify? They're afraid of competition. They're like, look, they become more of a threat. If they all pool their resources, they're a threat to us. Okay? And so, look, Wilhelm I and Otto von Bismarck know that other countries will be threatened by this and there could be problems. And it's not just a military threat. Why else would they be concerned about these countries joining together? What else are countries competing for other than just actual physical power? What do Americans always want to be doing well? Think about our world. How do we judge a president? One of the things we look at, how's the economy doing? All right. And this country, if they pool their resources, it's not just a military threat, but they're an economic threat. They're like, hey, they're going to cut into our financials. All right. So these other countries like France, Italy, Austria, Russia, they are threatened by the mere thought of this. And it's not a secret. Bismarck and Wilhelm I, they don't make it a secret that they're interested in unifying all the kingdoms together. Okay? Now, a couple other things about Bismarck that are important here. One is that Bismarck is a different political leader than other people. He believes in something, a political idea called Realpolitik. All right, and that's up there, and yes, that's how you spell it. They just put it into a German phrase, but he believes in something called Realpolitik. Right, and at the time, it's a little bit different than what most public officials would use. Realpolitik is when you make decisions not based on morality, but based on what's practical. Okay, it's when you make decisions based not what's on moral, but what's on practical. For example, Otto von Bismarck, when one of the things he did while he's a leader was he started working on social welfare programs like a retirement pension that the government would provide people, like we have Social Security. Bismarck didn't do it because he genuinely cared about people. He did it because he didn't want his best employees leaving the country. Okay? Bismarck says, I'm going to do what's practical, not what's moral. Right? Meaning that if Bismarck has to, if he's got to break a few bones to get what he wants, he's not afraid to do that. Right? And he says, I don't care about what's moral or not moral. I care about doing what's best for my country. Right? He's the guy you send in to do the dirty work. All right. And so Wilhelm I talks to Bismarck and he says, how can we take Prussia and unify all these other German states together? And Bismarck says, the only way we're going to do it is by war. Okay. So he literally says, we're going to have to fight other countries. So here's what Bismarck does. He literally picks a fight with 3 different countries, one right after the other. Okay. He literally provokes war. Right? That's my kind of guy right there. And he's like, I'm going to go looking for a fight. All right. Now, the fights in themselves, they don't like, and you don't need to remember all of them. I'm just going to tell you the one that matters the most. But let me go back to the map and show you. Okay. One of the fights he picks are with these 2 states up here, Schleswig and Holstein. All right. And because they didn't want to go along with what he was doing, so he's like, look, we're just going to take them by force. But the other countries that he picks a fight with, one, Austria. All right. And the one that's the most important, the third of these wars that he fights, he picks a fight with France. Okay? Now, one thing you need to know about the French and the Germanic people of that region, They have a long history of conflict with one another. All right. And Otto von Bismarck is going to fire up that rivalry again. They fight in what's called the Franco-Prussian War. Ooh. And on this, by the way, on this, I fixed it on your outline. It should say 1870 and 1871, right? Does it say that on your outline? Shoot. All right. I don't know why I made a typo there. It shouldn't be 1880, 1801. It should be 1870, 1871. France and Prussia are going to fight a war, and long story short, okay, long story short, Prussia is going to wipe the floor with poor France. It's an embarrassing loss for France, okay? So literally, Bismarck and Prussia, they're known for their military strength. They win all three of these wars, and they defeat any of the countries that saw them as a big time threat, okay? And when they defeat France, they're like, hey, now's the time to declare to the rest of the world that we are now a new nation. We are Germany. Okay? Now, here's an artist's depiction of what happened after the Franco Prussian War. And this is important for a couple of reasons. Okay? Number one, you see up here that you're having the coronation of Wilhelm I. Wilhelm I is going to become Emperor of Germany. All right? And he's being coronated here. And right here's Otto von Bismarck. He is bringing up the crown there. And this is a very majestic thing. You can see you're known by the German soldiers over here on the left. You can see the guy with the spiked helmet. That's what they're known for at the time. And everybody's got their swords drawn. But here's what's really important about this is the location where they do this coronation. Okay? They celebrate their new nation and they crown their new emperor in France. Okay, this right here, if you're not familiar, it's the Palace of Versailles, and that's going to be a big deal. So literally, not only did they just humiliate France, who they've had long conflict with, but they crowned their new emperor right there in their home turf. How do you think France feels about that? They didn't like it at all. And let me tell you what, the French are good at something, and it's called holding a grudge. And let me tell you, this they will not forget. This is a big time insult. To give you an example, does anybody remember a wide receiver named Terrell Owens for the San Francisco 49ers? He was playing the Dallas Cowboys, and after he scored a touchdown, he runs right to the midfield where the big Dallas star is, and he spikes the ball right there in the middle of the field. He literally one-ups everybody. And how did anybody remember how the Dallas players responded? They flipped out. They all started running at him. Like one of them like knocks him to the ground. He was celebrating on their home turf. That's exactly what the Germans are doing. Okay? Bismarck and Wilhelm I have achieved their goal. They've unified Germany together. Okay? But they've made a powerful enemy in doing this. France is not going to forget about this. Okay? Now, here's the weird thing about this too, and this is the last thing we're going to mention about Germany at the moment, and we're going to get to an assignment about them. All right, Germany is going to be a real powerful country now that they've unified together. But Wilhelm I, as you can tell from his picture here, okay, he was getting on in his years, and he's pretty old. Shortly after the Franco-Prussian War, shortly after he's emperor, he only lives about 8 or 9 years after that, and he dies shortly afterwards. So he doesn't get to be emperor for too very long, but he's got a cool legacy. All right, I'd like to be remembered for unifying a country. Yeah, and then doing it through beating people up. Just kidding. All right, now Bismarck is still alive though. Okay, but there's a problem. All right, Bismarck has to work with the new emperor. And the new emperor is Wilhelm I's grandson, Wilhelm II. Okay? Which, wait a second, is there a natural skip in that? Does royalty go from grandfather to grandson? Normally, no. Okay, but here's what happened. Literally right after Wilhelm I died, his son, and I'm trying to think of his son's name right off the top of my head. I think it was Frederick. But his son literally was emperor for like 3 months and died randomly, just died mysteriously. Okay? So his son dies, and literally, Wilhelm II, when he takes over Germany, which is a powerhouse country now, he's only 29. Okay? Wilhelm II, let me show you a picture of him. Here's Wilhelm II. Gosh, that mustache is creepy. All right, now this is later on, but imagine you are in charge of one of the most powerful countries in Europe and you're only 29 years old. Right? Now there's something else that's relevant too. Right? 29-year-olds who never had to work for something, they're a little bit of a problem. And there's a few things about Wilhelm we need to know. Okay? One of them is this. He has one arm shorter than the other. Why do we need to know that? Why do I bring that up? Other than it's just a funny fact. Because like I just imagine Wilhelm like this all the time. Right? Just it could be worse. Why is that an issue? People who have a major physical deformity, especially if it's noticeable, what does that do to their psyche, their mental state? Not crazy, but self-conscious, okay? He's very self-conscious about this and other things. All right? He knows he's young. He knows he's got a lot of pressure on him, okay? And ultimately, he says, "Look, I want to be known for something in the world. I want to show people that I am fit to rule this great nation. And you know what? I want to show that I'm a somebody and that I can do the job." All right? So imagine this. You've got 29-year-old Wilhelm II who really wants to prove himself. He's self-conscious about a lot of things, okay? And now he's got to work with the 70-something-year-old Otto von Bismarck. How do you think that relationship, that power dynamic is going to work out? All right? Otto von Bismarck tries to give him advice, and do you think Wilhelm II wants to take it? No, because youth is always impetuous and foolish, and they do dumb things, right? Wilhelm II fires Otto von Bismarck. Wow, that's frustrating. If you're Bismarck, you're like, bro, I helped invent this country when you were in diapers. Okay? So please, by all means, don't tell me how to run a country. Okay? That's like, I hate it when people, I don't know how this happens, but a lot of times when I get an administrator who's an assistant principal or somebody who works for the county and they're like 30 years old and they taught for like 1 year, they want to try to tell me how to be a good teacher, I'm like, nope, sorry, not hearing it. Okay. Or like when rookies in football come in and try to tell veterans how it's done. Nope, they're not listening to it. All right. Wilhelm, though, as emperor, has the ability to do that. Okay. Now, here's what Wilhelm's going to do that is going to be absolutely a big change to Germany. All right. He says, look, up until now, Otto von Bismarck and Wilhelm I were all about bringing Germany together. And so they were one of the few European countries that didn't go colonize and get involved in imperialism. They weren't involved as much. Wilhelm says, we're going to be different. We're going to modernize everything about us. We are going to get colonies, and we want to become the most powerful nation in Europe. All right? Wilhelm says we're going to colonize, we're going to compete with the other nations in the world, and we're going to be the dominant power in Europe. He's hungry, he's young, he wants to prove himself. That's the problem with young men. They always feel like they got to prove themselves. It's like somebody calls you a name, and you're like, I got to do something about it. No, you don't. Okay? He wants to prove himself. Right? And that's going to be a threat. He doesn't have a problem with anybody else seeing him as a threat. And he says, look, one thing he did have in common with Bismarck was if I have to use force, I will use force. Right? But he's young, he's self-conscious, he thinks he can do it on his own. And when he does do it, he surely doesn't want to share credit with an old man like Bismarck, because had Wilhelm succeeded, who would they have said, well, you couldn't do it without him? They're like, you had to have Bismarck. Fun fact of the day, too. You know that North Dakota, the capital is Bismarck, North Dakota, and they named it after Otto von Bismarck. They thought if they named it after him that Germany would invest money in their community, and they had like a strong German population. And Bismarck was flattered, but he didn't give them any money. It's good times. Good times. All right, that's a good place for us to stop right now.